In our Flight Numbers Don't Matter series, we've set out to find the straightest putter, the straightest fairway driver, and the straightest mid-range, twice. Why? Because almost everyone agrees that a straight shot is the most difficult and sometimes most important shot in all of disc golf. But what about distance drivers? Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs. This is Flight Numbers Don't Matter, and today's video is sponsored by Mojoh Gear. More about their riser in just a bit. We've gathered together this bin of 37 distance drivers, and to find the straightest distance driver, I think we first have to ask ourselves an important question. Can distance drivers actually be straight? Well, what does straight really mean in disc golf? Does it mean the disc stays straight for the entire flight? Or does it mean the disc turns a little bit and fades a bit and finishes pretty much straight ahead of where it started? I would argue both could technically be true, but what matters is, of course, the shape of the fairway you're flying. On a fairway like this, you need a disc that can fly almost completely straight the entire time, and that's hard. I've heard it said many times that a straight shot is the hardest shot in disc golf, and I've also heard it said that the faster a disc is, the harder it is to control. So by my calculations, a straight shot with a distance driver is therefore the hardest shot in all of disc golf. Either that or 28-foot putts. So how are we going to do this test today? Well, allow me to use our first disc to demonstrate. This is the MVP Catalyst. Rated at 13 speed, 5.5 glide, -2 turn and 2 fade, it was pretty close to straight. On this shot, it gets a very subtle turn, holding for a bit before a little bit of late fade. But to give you some idea of how touchy distance drivers can be, this is the same disc thrown on nearly the same angle, and it gets a completely different result. So we're going to do the same thing we did with the Catalyst here in this open field with the rest of our discs. And with a large scale comparison like this, you're probably wondering really how we went about selecting those discs. Our 37 discs are all made up of distance drivers that are 10 to 14 speed discs with a variety of turn and fade combinations, including -1-1, -2-2, -2-1, and -1-2. And what that means really in the world of distance drivers is one of two things. Either the combination of turn and fade numbers indicate that it can have a straight flight or at least a sort of neutral stability, or it means somewhere in the marketing for that disc, it is marketed as being straight. But as we're going to find out today, straight marketing and straight flight numbers do not equal straight flights. I'll be throwing these discs at least 5 times each to make sure that I both understand what the disc is capable of, and then also show you the straightest flight that I could achieve. But that means for just this one video, I'll be doing over 200 throws, and that can certainly wear you down. In fact, it literally did. I'm on a 3-week break due to some backache I was having while throwing. And on top of all the throwing, it can be a literal pain in the back to constantly bend over to get the discs from the bag and put them back over and over and over again. And that's just one thing that today's sponsor can help with, Mojoh Gear. This is the Mojoh Ryzer. The Ryzer is a game-changing bag stand that attaches to almost any disc golf bag and instantly raises your bag 14 inches off the ground. Weighing in at approximately 2.5 pounds, it can support up to 50 pounds. It works on uneven ground or slopes. The height of the Ryzer is perfect to grab putters straight from the top of your bag, as well as other important accessories like your mini or rangefinder without bending over at all. And it keeps your towels up off the ground so they can absorb moisture from your discs and not the grass. The Ryzer is super easy to use. Just grab the handle as you set it down, and the weight of the bag helps pull the handle and extend the legs. After you throw your shot, simply pick up the bag and the legs will automatically retract. The Ryzer has a sturdy ABS plastic and aluminum design, and it has a cushion on the back for added comfort. And the Ryzer is as easy to set up as it is to use. Caleb and I attached our Ryzers to his grip bag and my Squatch bag in just a few minutes with the help of their how-to videos on their website. In fact, they recently included G-hooks for Squatch bags and some pound bags, making installation a breeze. They hook conveniently onto the loops here on the front of newer Squatch bags. But grip and Squatch are only 2 of over 75 bags the Ryzer fits, including most medium to large bags from Squatch, Pound, Grip, Axiom, dynamic discs, and much more. You can learn more about the Mojoh Ryzer, including bag compatibility, reviews, and setup instructions at mojohgear.com or at the link in the video description. And make sure to use code SSD10 for $10 off your order. Thanks again to Mojoh Gear for sponsoring today's video and supporting our channel. Now, back to the distance drivers. Since we kicked things off with a fairly straight disc, the Catalyst, I think we'll jump right to another popular distance driver from the MVP family, the Wave. Rated at 11.5, -22, the Wave is one of the most popular distance drivers in the MVP lineup, especially for amateur players. And I suspect there's a good reason for that. I was hoping that that reason would be that it's straight, but I think I found a different reason. No matter how I adjusted my release angle, power level, whatever, it just turned over. Kept turning, and even rolled. And unfortunately, that makes the Wave one of the most understable discs we tested today. The Wave, though, is available in a ton of different plastics from MVP, like Proton, Plasma, Fission, Cosmic Neutron, Eclipse, and even their new Particle Glow Proton. So I wouldn't be surprised to learn that at least one of those blends is a little more overstable than the Neutron and might be a bit straighter for my arm. So if you throw a Wave, tell us about your experience with it in the comments below. We've still got a couple MVP discs to try out later on, so there's still hope that we'll find something a little bit straighter from them. But for now, let's continue our way through our discs with -2 turn and 2 fade, because there's a bunch. Beginning with the first of 3 discs from Innova, the Shryke. The Shryke is a fast, wide rim distance driver from Innova, rated at 13.6, -22. And it's one of just a handful of discs that Innova takes time to change flight numbers when it's in different plastics, like the -1.2 rating that the Shryke gets in Champion plastic here. Today, we'll actually be throwing both, and we'll start with the Champion Glow Shryke, because it's the first disc that's going to present us with a little bit of a challenge. This Shryke gets a great flight. There's definitely some turn, no denying that, and there's some late fade, and that leaves us with a fairly straight shot. But this takes us back to our earlier conundrum. What is straight? Is this straight? I think that largely depends on the fairway. So I'd say this Shryke is pretty straight, but what do you all think? Leave a comment down below. Now, as we all know, flight numbers are not all they appear to be sometimes, so you might expect this Champion Shryke, rated at 13.6, -1.2, to be a little straighter, maybe a touch less turn before it fades, but nope. It does this instead. Surprisingly, much more understable than the Champion Glow. So let's move on to our second Innova disc with -2 turn and 2 fade. This is the Champion Glow Tern. And this is another disc that's swapping flight numbers, because in most other plastics, like this Halo Star Tern we have, it's rated with -3 turn instead of -2. But it turns out, regardless of which turn you use, they get a pretty similar flight. Take a look. Oh yeah, both get a pretty moderate turn before a little bit of low speed fade, but I'm going to say neither of those was very straight. So let's move on to our last -22 disc from Innova, the Beast. Rated at 10.5, -22, the Beast was approved by the PDGA way back in 2002. And it's quite popular among amateur players for being a fairly neutral flyer. But this Barry Schultz Champion Beast is anything but. In fact, it probably explains why it was in our used bin, because it flies like this. Surprised? So was Caleb.
We got a stable beast? Since when? Holy.
So the Shryke was by far the straightest option, at least from Innova so far, but let's move on to a few other discs, because the Shryke isn't even going to come close to our top 5 straightest discs. And we have many more discs to test, like this, the Discraft Scorch. We have 2 Scorches to test today. One is in ESP plastic, and the other is the new fused Scorch released earlier this year. The Scorch is rated at 11.6, -22, and I think it's a really interesting design. The wing has always felt a little bit strange to me. It's sort of symmetrical the way that it tapers to a point on both the top and the bottom of the wing. It also has a little micro bead along the edge of the inside rim, which is certainly not common on high-speed discs. So does any of this help it fly straight? Well, the ESP Scorch is about as straight as our Champion Glow Shryke. It gets a little bit of smooth turn and then a mild fade. But the fused Scorch is a totally different story, because it is much more overstable than your average Scorch. And while that means it isn't very straight, that's still some very useful information. One of the reasons we love testing discs in so many different plastics is it gives you an opportunity to find a shape of a disc that you like, and then sort of fine-tuning to the plastic with the right stability for your arm speed. Meaning you could take a Tern or a Shryke or a Scorch and figure out which one in which plastic blend is actually going to work right for you. Alright, there's still a ton of discs in this -2.2 category, so let's move quickly through some discs that were just never anywhere close to flying straight. Like the Castoplast K1 Glow Elva, rated at 11.6, -2.2, it was super understable on every single throw. I had a similar experience with the Discmania Mentor, rated at 11.5, -2.2. It was also super understable. While the Discmania Majesty, rated at 13.5, -2.2, was super overstable. The Mentor and Majesty showing us perhaps why the active line was discontinued. And a disc with the same flight numbers as the Shryke and basically the same flight was the Goliath disc's Slingshot. And after that, that means we have so far thrown 13 discs already, and only one of them is even close to making it to our top 5 straightest distance drivers. So let's see if any of our last 3 -2.2 discs have what it takes. This is the Expanse. A new distance driver from Thought Space Athletics, the Expanse is the first disc in a new collaboration with Discraft, which is quite interesting because it puts the Expanse, rated at 11.5, -2.2, in direct competition with the Scorch that we saw a moment ago. So how does the Expanse fly in this ESP-inspired parallel plastic? Well, compared to the ESP Scorch, it's remarkably similar. It gets some turn, some fade, but again was not necessarily straight. I do think that the Expanse will be really popular among amateur players and slightly lower arm speeds because it has a much more familiar and comfortable feel in my hand compared to the Scorch. But I don't think I would count on it for tight tunnel shots. A disc that might work on tunnel shots, though, is this, the newest distance driver from Infinite Discs, the Sultan. Initially released at the Disc South Expo in Dallas, the Sultan is a really unusual design. While the Scorch had a micro bead on the inside rim, the Sultan has a big bead right out on the leading edge of the wing. Fortunately, you don't really feel that when you put it in your hand, so I don't think it's going to interfere with anyone's grip or release. And off the tee, the Sultan was what I would call subtle. On one shot, I got a very subtle turn and fade, while on another I got a smooth, subtle turn, even though I threw it a little too low. The Sultan is by no means the straightest disc that we threw, but I do think it has a chance to make it into the top 5. Something that I can also say for the next disc that we're going to test, the Prodigy D3. Rated at 12.6, -2.2, the D3 is our last disc in our -2.2 category, and we saved the best for last. In this white 400 plastic, it got the straightest flight so far today. With the faintest of turns before a gentle fade, the D3 sets the standard moving forward. If you enjoy our Flight Numbers Don't Matter series, one of the best ways to support us is by purchasing one of the exact discs that we tested in our video today. For example, if you really liked the flight of this Prodigy D3 that we saw today, you can purchase this exact disc from our website for 10% off, since it's lightly used. And if you become a channel member for $3, $6, or $10 a month, you can take an additional 5, 10, or 20% off that purchase, which means this exact Prodigy D3 would cost a top-tier member only $11.90 before shipping. Nearly every disc that we tested today will be available while supplies last on our website at the link in the video description. Thank you all very much for your support. Now let's get to our next category of discs rated with -2 turn and 1 fade. And with just 4 discs in this category, you might not expect there to be that much variety in flight characteristics. But you'd be wrong. First up is the Discmania S-Line TD, Rated at 10.5, -2.1, the TD, short for turning driver, feels much smaller in the hand than just about any disc I've thrown today. And it also turned more than just about any disc I've thrown today. Can our only gateway disc do any better? This is the Aura in NXT plastic. Rated at 12.6, -2.1, we threw the Aura just recently in a video all about gateway, and while Caleb found it to be very understable, I did not. For my backhand power, the Aura held much straighter before fading out. Still not quite the straight flight we're looking for though. Next up in our -2.1 category is the XCOM discs Draco, or DRAW for short. And this is a strange one. Firstly, you may be confused by its flight numbers, and why this disc is included in this category of -2 turn and 1 fade discs, because clearly the flight numbers on the disc say -1 turn and 2 fade. But back when we threw XCOM discs in our first impression series, we learned something kind of bizarre about their flight numbers. It turns out the turn and fade numbers are flip-flopped. So now that we know that, we can put the draw in the right category and show you its slightly understable flight. And rounding out this category is another not very straight disc, the Clash Discs Vanilla. Rated at 11.6, -2.1 in their plenty bioplastic, the Vanilla is just not that straight. While testing it on the same day as the rest of these distance drivers, it got some turn and fade, but I found it a bit more overstable when I tested it a month or so ago for our Plastic is in the Details video on Plenty Bioplastic. Needless to say, the -2.1 category didn't really deliver any contenders for straightest distance driver. And at this point in the comparison, I am sort of starting to wonder, can distance drivers achieve straight? I guess we'll find out. Let's take a look at our next category, discs with -1 turn and 2 fade. And right out of the gate, there are several discs in this category that were just way too overstable, such as the Innova Star Crate, rated at 11.5, -1.2. It flew more like an overstable Wraith, just super beefy for me on every single throw. Similarly, we have the Infinite Discs Aztec, a 10-speed that was super overstable in this Metal Flake Glow C-Blend plastic. So I figured maybe we should try the Aztec in a typically more neutral plastic blend from Infinite called iBlend. But nope, that was also very overstable. So then I thought, let's go with a disc that I've thrown in the past that I've actually seen fly somewhat straight. The Infinite Discs Pharaoh. But in Halo S-Blend plastic, despite being this good looking, it was also too overstable. Once again, I thought, okay, let's go with the typically more neutral iBlend plastic for the Pharaoh and see if we get a straighter flight. But nope, that was also overstable. Again. And to say things weren't going according to plan in this -1 turn 2 fade category is a bit of an understatement. But you never know, maybe the next disc will be less overstable. This was an Innova Star Corvette, rated at 14.6, -1.2, and it was also overstable. Okay, there's no logic on this move, but I happen to have a Corvette in Champion plastic. It's super domey. Maybe that means something. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Let's see. Whoa, okay, wow. So that's flying in a different direction. That's interesting, right? Right? All right, I need to calm down. Okay, so far this -1.2 category is a total bust, but there are 4 discs left to try and salvage something. So let's see if our very last disc from Innova can do the trick. This is the Racer. Rated at 12.6, -1.2, the Racer has a similar design to the Infinite Sultan, which of course is also made by Innova. It features a small bead out on the leading edge, and it's a disc that I wanted to do a video on months ago. So at the time, I bought one from Spinners on the Green in Scottsdale, Arizona while I was on vacation, and I immediately threw it into the water at Fountain Hills. Lucky for me, Innova sent me a new one for Christmas, and it was also overstable. Next up is the only Doomsday disc we have today, the Cataclysm. Rated at 11.5, -1.2, we have it in isolation glow plastic, and the design is very similar to the Discraft Scorch, and so is the flight, because it was quick to turn like the ESB Scorch. But more importantly, it was not straight. And neither was the Prodigy H3V2, also rated at 11.5, -1.2, because it was super understable. Our last disc in the -1.2 category is the Discmania Enigma. Here in Luxe Vapor Plastic, it's a 12-speed from Discmania's Evolution line, and it looks and feels great. But in terms of achieving a straight flight, I think the best thing I can say is that it was in fact the straightest -1.2 disc we tested. Though that's not saying much. Now, there were two discs that we had today in this whole bin, this whole lineup, that didn't really fit any of these flight number categories. So let's take a look at those two now. The first is the Finish Line Era. The Era is rated at 10.5, -1.51, and it's marketed by Finish Line as a straight distance driver. I've heard some people refer to it as a longer buzz, which is a big claim for a disc that flies like this. I've thrown the Era many times, and unfortunately for my arm, it's just way too overstable. Finish Line is owned by Drew Gibson, so I can only assume that these discs work better for somebody with a little more oomph. Another disc I had high hopes for was another one of Castoplast's newer distance drivers, the Voss. Swedish for sharp, the Voss is rated at 12.5, -1.52, and the shape and feel in my hand is great. It seems like it should be a candidate for a straight flight, so I gave it a few throws, but as I'm sure you can see, a pattern emerged. Yet another overstable flight from a neutrally rated disc. And to say that I was frustrated while recording this video is a massive understatement. I took a lot of time selecting these discs, either based on flight numbers, the marketing that said they would be straight, or the fact that someone, somewhere at some point, said that they threw them straight. And so far, there's just not much to show for that. Maybe a straight shot with a distance driver really is the hardest shot in disc golf, and maybe I'm not up for the task. I guess we'll soon know for sure, because we have just 4 distance drivers left to try and salvage something and find a straight flight. So let's get into our final category, and perhaps the one with the most potential, distance drivers with -1 turn and 1 fade. And we begin this category with 2 allegedly straight discs from DGA, the Undertow and Rogue. Rated at 10.4, -1.1, and 11.4, -1.1 respectively, they both sound like they should be pretty straight. But say it with me, everyone, flight numbers don't matter, because the Undertow flew like this, and the Rogue flew like this. Now, DGA recently did a complete overhaul of their plastics, so it's entirely possible that one of the new blends of the Rogue will fly maybe more true to the way it was intended. But we'll never know for the Undertow because it has since been discontinued. Which means we have just one mold left in 2 different plastics, and it really is our only hope. This is the MVP Neutron Trail, and this is the MVP Proton Trail. Rated at 10.5, -1.1, the Trail would easily win 2024 Disc of the Year if that were an award given out by someone, because it was a runaway success. Selling out repeatedly throughout last season, we put in more orders for the Trail than any other disc. In fact, we did not 1 video on the Trail, but 2, and both were a huge success. And there's no doubt in my mind that it is pretty darn straight. Or is it? Well, in Neutron plastic, it was a tad more understable. But this is a pretty mild turn compared to a lot of the discs that we saw today. Whereas in Proton plastic, the Trail finally delivered what we've been looking for all day. A pretty darn straight flight. Is it as straight as the straightest mid-range that we found in those previous videos? Not even close. But by distance driver standards, it's pretty darn straight. So where does that leave our top 5 straightest distance drivers? Well, remember, I threw each of these discs at least 5 times, and these were the straightest flights that I could achieve. Starting at number 5, the Discmania Enigma. Despite a bit of a higher release, the Enigma still gets a subtle turn and fade for a straight-ish flight. At number 4, the Infinite Sultan. One of the strangest designs yielded some pretty nice flights, and the Sultan is well worth a look if you're shopping for a neutral distance driver. Number 3, the MVP Catalyst. The Axiom Tenacity actually used to be the straightest flying disc in my bag a few years ago, and the Catalyst has a very similar design. And I would recommend it either to lower arm speeds looking for straighter flights, or faster arm speeds looking for hyzer flip turnover shots. And number 2, the Prodigy D3. I didn't know what to expect from the D3, but I did not expect it to have such an incredibly straight flight. Very impressive. And unsurprisingly, at number 1, it's the MVP Trail. But not just any trail, specifically this Proton Trail. While the Neutron Trail has been in my bag for a while and gets some decent distance, I think this Proton Trail gets a little less turn and less fade by comparison, delivering overall a straighter flight, and by far the straightest today. Now, I want to be clear, these are not the straightest distance drivers on the market. They were the straightest distance drivers for me, my arm on this day in these conditions. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will fly straight for you. But if you think that you throw with a similar speed or technique to myself, then you might find some of the discs that worked well for me will work well for you. What did you think of our results? Have you thrown any of these distance drivers? Let us know in the comments below. And also comment below what tests and comparisons you'd like to see next on Flight Numbers Don't Matter. Huge thanks again to Mojoh Gear for supporting our channel. Be sure to use code SSD10 for $10 off your Mojoh Ryzer at mojohgear.com or at the link in the video description. And finally, huge thanks to all of our members for your support. Click the join button below to learn more about how you can become a member and get great perks like early access to these videos, discounts on our website, and more. For Six Sided Discs, I'm Greg. We'll see you in the next one. Arm day. Arm day is making this harder. Why did I record this on arm day? My arms are so tired. Okay. Ugh. Dude, you don't even know. And right out of the gate, there were several discs in the category. And to say that I'm...
Nice. Oh.
Whoa! Hey, don't... See, it's not just me.
Yeah. Sorry, that's on me. That's on me.
That's pretty straight.
It's a good thing. That's on me.
And the part you didn't see is where my hard drive was completely full of storage halfway through this recording. So we had to take an hour to delete footage. Yay! Oh. Cut. If you like this content and want to see more, please consider liking the video, subscribing to our channel, or becoming a member. Your support makes this content possible.